There are people who have collections and there are people who have accumulations. A lot of the time you're not discovering hidden gems, right? There's a reason there's a TV show about that. It doesn't happen very much and it's really exciting when it does.
Welcome to The Endgame by ClearEstate, life's final chapter discussed openly. I'm Davide and Sara, one of the co-founders here at ClearEstate, joined by Sara, our estate diva. Diva? Is diva a good one? I don't know. Our guest today is another colleague, Ellie Muir, who comes to us from the world of fine art. Is it fine art or fine arts? Or both?
Either or, I think, is acceptable. As long as you call me diva.
Well, if you're diva, you can do whatever you want. So.
I don't think my hair is big enough for that title, but...
So she's currently the team lead of our partner relations team at ClearEstate. And I think she spent a bunch of time in the art world, auctioneering and appraising in Toronto. Ellie still maintains a strong relationship with that world and has a bunch of experience. So we've said it before, like people argue about shit, correct? Oh, sorry, stuff. And so people are arguing about things and stuff, and art and collectibles, they're stuff and they can be very valuable.
Yes.
And a source of tension and conflict in estates. It all starts with the inventory, Sara, like when you're planning your estate, especially if you have valuable things.
I think most folks who have, fine art and collectibles are aware of the importance of valuing it and having kind of a solid record and understanding of what those valuables mean. What's interesting about art and collectibles is that it can change over time, though. The value of these items can change sometimes drastically over time. So actually that kind of inventory becomes more and more important as you continue to revisit your estate plan over the years. But as you said, a lot of value is actually sentimental value, like as we'll talk about as well. And so kind of combining the monetary value and the sentimental value and making sure everything kind of lines up is also a super important part of estate planning.
And one thing that Ellie I know is going to talk about is provenance. So tracing back, especially in the art world, tracing back the piece, that's important. Have you seen this in your own practice?
Yes. And unfortunately, sometimes, there aren't great records where you could actually prove that a particular, collectible or valuable actually came from where your kind of legend in your family says it came from, right? And so then that actually causes quite a bit of issues and also like kind of like emotional stress on families because the legacy of those items is a super emotional part of it, right? And some things have been in families for years and, it's like, yeah, my grandmother passed this down and she got it, firsthand from, so-and-so. But if you can't prove it, then it's not actually worth what you think it's worth, right?
It's pretty difficult sometimes, like especially if it's been on a mantle for 200 years, but
Exactly.
It's by that famous artist, so it's
exactly. And if the popular TV shows about pawn shops have taught us is a lot of times it really is not worth what people come in thinking it's worth.
Antiques Roadshow, my favorite Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, everybody's looking for that surprise. yeah. Until we get that surprise item, right?
Yeah, I know that. They always keep it for 3/4 in, and then you go, I really wish I had that $50,000 little China statue or whatever.
Exactly. And we're led to believe that's more common than it actually is, I think.
We'll talk about collectibles and sometimes there's high value, low value, and the line between all of that and hoarding. So I think it's interesting, and I think it's going to be an interesting episode. Coming up, we'll bring in our colleague Ellie, and she'll share some tips to make sure your estate settlement isn't an antiques shit show. Please don't forget to subscribe to The Endgame by ClearEstate on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. let's get right into it. Ellie, you're a colleague at ClearEstate, and you're also some kind of a art expert. So it's great to have you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm always excited to be able to talk about the long history I have with helping families with their art collections and the former life I used to live. But I think it's been applying well, nicely here as I joined the team at ClearEstate.
So it's super interesting that you've helped many families with art collections. So in my circles, there's not a lot of families with art collections. Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, so I used to work at one of Canada's oldest auction houses. And so I spent a decade there, really being one of the first people that families would encounter when they would approach the auction house with, an art collection and they had no idea what it was worth, or sometimes they did, but, just needing guidance and needing to understand what to do with it. And they were at that point in the estate settlement where it was time to start dispersing of the belongings from the estate. And when it comes to art, you can't really slice it up into four pieces for each member of the family. And we would help them make those decisions about what they would keep and what they would sell, and even sometimes what they would donate in the end. So having the right guidance, the right advice from experts in the right fields is the way to go about it. And so we were giving peace of mind to a lot of people. And yeah, I can't name how many families I helped, but it was a regular basis every day. There would be somebody contacting me about mom or grandma or grandpa's art collection.
Just out of curiosity, what does an art collection look like? I just want to be clear. Like it's because there's no picture in my mind.
So the ones that I would end up dealing with, right? We wouldn't be able to sell everything that we saw. I probably looked at hundreds of thousands of things per year in my position, right? Thank goodness for the internet. But the collection that we would deal with would often be, a smattering of 10 or 15 paintings that have appreciated or at least held their value over time. There would be sculptures, bronzes, and then even decorative arts. So things like silver and porcelain and garnitures and clocks, rugs and carpets, on and on, even some really fine furniture we would take occasionally. So it depends on what the person would like and what they accumulated over time. I worked mostly with families in Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa area, and there certainly is an aesthetic of the generation that was coming through the auction house that we saw quite often. From my position, I mostly dealt with the Canadian art, and that makes sense. Canadians were proud collectors of Canadian art, and so I would see a lot, the names that you typically come across, right? Like Group of Seven. We would see that all the time.
You would see some group of seven on a regular basis in your practice?
Yes, yeah. I mean, they painted a lot of paintings, some of them. So you would see it a lot. Some less than others, right? Just because of lifespan or just the output that they managed to do. But yeah, like A.Y. Jackson, I would have 5 or 10 on the racks at all times. He really painted a lot. On the other hand, like a big, beautiful canvas by Lauren Harris, that's going to come through the auction house on a less regular basis, and it would be something very special. So, but I had lots of favorites, and I would get excited about different scenes and different artists that I would get to see, and everyone had their own taste. But yeah, art collections were mostly landscapes and gold frames, hopefully with good labels on the back by really well-noted Canadian galleries, lots of them from Montreal and Toronto that you would recognize, and maybe some, Sorel Etrog sculptures, perhaps. You'd see that a lot, or bronzes by, some of the Quebec sculptors. So, yeah, they were all different but similar in a way. Less often you would see people with taste that they collected in, the 50s, the 60s, when you get into like the abstract stuff, right? Les Automatistes or Painter's 11, things like that, Riopel or, Ronald, or I could go on and on. But yeah, it's kind of neat. People would kind of stick to a theme, and it would really look nice in the house when I got to visit as well.
That's fascinating. In my mind, I have like Antiques Roadshow type of like scenario where you're looking at a piece and the person's just begging for a value. But before we get there, not begging, but maybe not understanding what the value is. or maybe overestimating what the value is. How does one get there, correct? Like, so what's your background and how did you get to being the person that kind of handles a collection? How does one get there?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to start at Waddington's in a position where I really was siphoning through the inbox, right? Like really, really trying to pinpoint everything and getting opinions back to people. So I was kind of like the center of the wheel in terms of collecting the opinions from all the different specialists, amalgamating that into something that we could communicate back to the person and then helping them bring those consignments in. So you learn a lot, right? You learn by seeing a million things, and that's just the only way to do it.
And your background before that was unrelated.
Yeah, I mean, I've
That's
always loved
amazing.
art. I've always appreciated artists and craft and all those different aspects. And I actually just was too practical to ever pursue a career in that field. I didn't think it was possible to make money staring at beautiful things all the time. So I did not go to school for anything like that. I did take Canadian history though, which served me well. I took a lot of history courses at University of Toronto, and that really did help a lot just to contextualize things. So, but yeah, at Waddington's, it was after years of really just different customer service jobs, honestly. And I was brought in by a former manager who wanted me to fill a role in a new department. But from there, I also started going on house visits. So I gained enough of a base knowledge and good rapport with our clients that they would have me go into their homes for what we called a walkabout. So, Ellie, there's a walkabout. Here's the address. Like, take the van and go over to the house and chat with the people because they have no idea what's in their home. They need to know what's valuable. And so my training grew from there because I actually got to like see things in situ and handle them and give people opinions on the spot. And if I was ever unsure about something, I was taking pictures and measurements and bringing them back to the specialists. And years pass, and by the end, I was helping to bring in the big portion of the Canadian art consignments for our major auctions of Canadian fine art.
So you're walking around a house
Hmm.
and you got a family kind of like following you
Yeah.
and then just like looking at things with you. And then they're thinking, this is worth a lot of money, or this is not worth a lot of money, or this is really, really valuable to us. And you can feel the feelings of the family behind like something. I mean, there's a lot of emotions there, obviously, if there's a collection.
Yeah.
How do you think through kind of like there's value in art, but then there's a market value versus a sentimental value. Like how do you navigate that if you're in that job of doing a walkthrough where you're going
Yeah.
like this is worth nothing versus like this is worth a lot, and it doesn't really matter what you care about.
That was a skill I developed for sure. Maybe, maybe it's a talent I have innately. I don't know. But yeah, what I would do in a walkabout is not only am I laying eyes on everything and making my own internal assessments as I go to each room, what am I going to pick up and look underneath or take off the wall and look behind, but I'm listening. You have to listen to what the families are saying because they have the stories behind this collection. So if it's a lot of like, yeah, and I've heard this, he went to a lot of garage sales and he used to go to this auction house like up in the farming areas and pick up things every weekend and oh gosh, you should see what's in the garage. A lot of the time you're not discovering hidden gems, right? There's a reason there's a TV show about that. It doesn't happen very much and it's really exciting when it does. We've all seen the clips. Not to say I didn't discover some really amazing things, but you kind of get a sense from the beginning of the type of collector. There are people who have collections and there are people who have accumulations, is what I like to say, where they've just kind of put their arms around huge piles of things that are interesting and shiny to them, like a crow. But then there are the people who had wonderful guidance, or just some people have amazing taste and see something before it's valuable and collect artists at the right time before the market peaks. I've handled all kinds of collections from there. But your question about how do I deal with those people? Well, um, they'll bring me to, the silverware drawer or the fine china cabinet where we were never allowed to use these plates. They were too special and she got them at her wedding. She registered for them at the Bay and we just know that they really must be something special, right? Because we've never laid a hand on them. We were too afraid to. Well, that's a Royal Dalton pattern that every second person registered for in 1952. And it probably was very special to her because that was just kind of how things were. But now the market is absolutely flooded with them and they're going for less than $1 a plate. It's just not. And who's buying them? Think about what you're doing on your special occasions. Are you breaking out china that you have to hand wash because it's got a gold rim and you can't put it in the dishwasher? All these things that we always heard. Well, yeah. And like, do you use solid sterling silverware? Well, no, I mean, I would never want to have to polish that every time I have my friends over. No, I'm not using that. Okay. So who's buying it? Who's buying it? And they kind of go, probably no one. Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like, yes, there's, sentimental value, there's the stories, but ultimately when it's time to bring something to market, there has to be people willing to compete to pay for it at auction. And, china and silverware is one of those categories. Sterling silver, of course, like there's intrinsic value there. They're made of silver.
There's hard value there. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a few things, of course, that are always going to be an exception where there are still collectors of certain patterns and certain makers. But that's when an expert comes in to be like, this is the wheat from the chaff, this is something special versus, kind of put it all in one lot and hope you get a couple $100 for it.
What's the craziest thing you found?
Oh, I have many stories. In terms of artwork, I was in a home and she had brought me in to look at her deceased husband's Inuit art collection. He had been a wonderful collector of Inuit art, had wonderful prints. Those were, easy enough to value. There were some sculptures and I did all of that. She had it all sort of arranged in the living room. And before I left, I noticed there was a closet door open in the living room and there was a painting leaning against the wall down under the coats. And I went, what's that? Because I recognized the artist immediately. And she said, what do you mean? And I walked over and fished it out of the bottom of the closet. And it was a painting by William Kurelek, or Kurelek, depending on how you'd like to pronounce that. Very valuable. And probably it was more valuable than any of the Inuit art that she had called me over to see. A lovely painting of a lumberjack in the woods bending down to take a sip out of a puddle, a painting called God Provides. It was really sweet, just a little thing, but he did a lot of really small paintings. And she had no idea that it had been there. And so I was able to take that in for her as well. She didn't miss it. She was happy to sell it and get her a really good return. And if I hadn't glanced into the bottom of the closet on my way out, which I was pretty good at doing, she wouldn't have known that she had something so valuable. She didn't know it was valuable at all. There was another time when somebody consigned a painting. I think it may have been a Jackson. So like a panel, like the en plein air panels. And these are going for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a piece. And you have to inspect them, right? So you want to know all about them. A lot of the time they'll come in a frame with paper across the back and like a Robert's Gallery label or something on the back. And you need to know what's underneath. You want to see it. So you take a little X-Acto knife and you slice the paper so you can flip it up and have a look at what's on the back, because Jackson would write things on there. He would tell you exactly where it was. You could see his pencil markings. Well, there was another painting. So they were stacked together. I don't know why or how. And actually, it probably wasn't Robert's Gallery because they never would have sold it that way. But yeah, it was just like, oh, double your money. Like you've got two. And they were both nice. Maybe they swapped them out occasionally. I don't know, but that was a funny one. And they consigned it as one painting. And of course, we're going to be honest and call them back and say, hey, guess what? You have two.
So these are after the fact, kind of like case studies where you have to go, you're appraising, whatever. If I'm planning my estate, like let's say I've been collecting, and whatever it is that I've been collecting, let's say I've been collecting, and I'm estate planning. How should I think about it? Should I be appraising everything in my collection or just having an inventory? What are the key things that I should be thinking about?
Yeah. If you're the collector, you're typically the one in your family who's interested in those things, right? So, and you're the one that has the knowledge about them. You know where you got them from. when you got them. You know who made them, right? Hopefully, if you're collecting the right way. So yeah, definitely make sure that there's an inventory. There's something somewhere, or at least on each thing, explaining what it is, where you got it. If you have receipts, fantastic. Like anything you can do to back up your collection, right? Solidify it and make sure that no matter what, somebody's going to know what they're looking at and what they're dealing with in the future. Getting an appraisal, if your collection is valuable, you're going to need it for insurance. You really should, right? You should be getting it insured, which is one value. It's not going to be the same value as what it would sell for. So keep that in mind as well. But it's something to go on. And then when you're making decisions, you want to make sure that you think about, did anyone express interest in this? Who do I want to have to become the custodian of this collection? Do they want it? They might just say yes to be nice, to be honest. No need to upset Grandpa Davide that we don't really want to take on his spoon collection, but it is good to at least know what they are.
It is dear to my heart, my spoon collection.
Yeah. But yeah, that information, shouldn't leave with you. Try to pass on as much as you can. And there are stories about that too that I have. One of the coolest things I ever sold had been in the family since 1886. And it was a painting that had hung, generally in the family dining room, so everybody in the family remembers this painting. But they didn't ever really have proof of what it was. And it required a lot of research when it came in. So it was a painting that everyone in the family always referred to as Pound Maker, Chief Pound Maker. A painting of a really wonderful painting by the artist who is quite well known, Robert Harris, who did. There's heritage minutes about Robert Harris, like the meeting of the school trustees and the Fathers of Confederation.
You have to be of a certain age to remember heritage minutes.
Yeah. I think we're all around the same age.
Yes.
So that was a good start, but them saying it was Pound Maker versus having any proof that it was is different, right? Chief Pound Maker, an amazing figure in Canadian history, a hero, right? A peacemaker, someone who was arrested and somebody who died shortly after release from prison, and a major player in the Northwest Rebellion, in bringing those tensions to an end. So, like, really a key figure in Canadian history at a really important time, especially kind of over where I'm from in central Canada. So I was interested, right? And this family had brought it around to different auction houses and received very modest estimates, like $5,000 to $7,000, something like that. You always put a range when it's an auction estimate, right? And then you kind of see what plays out. And they really were convinced that it was worth a lot more. And they brought it to me. And I think I may have been the fourth or fifth person that had seen it. And I went, yeah, I agree. Like, let's look into this. I don't think this is a $5,000 painting. This is something really special. And so they consigned it for research at first so that I could come up with an estimate. And we opened up the back and it had a title, but it said Chief of the Northwest. It didn't say Pound Maker. So then I researched further and we found that Robert Harris's painting had been included in the Colonial Exhibition in 1886 in London of Pound Maker. It was called that. And so we kind of were able to put it together that your family history, thank goodness we've been able to prove this out based on real records that we found. And they had had the painting in the family ever since it had been exhibited in London and come back to Canada. They acquired it in Montreal after that somewhere. And so we were able to tell this story of this amazing, huge portrait. Like it was, 4 feet tall. And it ended up selling for hundreds of thousands, not 5,000. So, once we were able to map out this history of the painting, tell the story, demonstrate the significance of it, demonstrate the feelings of the artist, we found a letter that he wrote to his mother where he was really on Pound Maker's side during that time because Harris was alive when Pound Maker was imprisoned. All of that came together and it ended up in a very important collection, a private collection of Canadian history paintings. So it's in the right place. It's going to be preserved. And that was one of the best stories at the auction. The family was there And they were in the audience in the live auction watching the bids happen. And by the time it sold, they were in tears. They were kind of happy, sad, but just feeling like, wow, that was fantastic. I think they clapped. And they were very grateful to me for taking that on. So it was a nice conjunction of my education and my experience for that painting.
What I'm hearing is that the context of the person that collects, or at least the eldest person in the family, they can actually trace back the
Mhm.
history of whatever has been around for a long time, is super important in terms of not just, I mean, we're talking about dollars, but we're also talking about like historical relevancy, like in the sense of like it could have just been sold and burnt off somewhere. Like the point is, if you can actually trace it back and explain the context, then it's history being preserved and it's also value being maximized. So I think that that's super interesting. I mean, we all have collections of stuff in our houses. And I know we all have parents and grandparents that have stuff. How does one differentiate between the gem that has historical kind of relevance and just crap, correct? Like what's yeah, if I'm walking in my grandparents' basement, how
Yeah.
do I tell the difference?
Well, hopefully things will be displayed in such a way that you're getting a hint, right?
Hmm.
That people generally know what their nicer things are. It's not often that you're going to find something at the bottom of a coat closet. Um,
Except for the china.
yeah, right. Most of the time, there is some amount of reverence placed on the thing that the person knows is the valuable thing. So that's helpful. But really, for me, yeah, I have been in many houses that were packed to the gills, and dusty and disorderly and papers everywhere. And you really did have to pick out the things. And that's honestly when you're gonna get an expert. A walkabout at the time, some auction houses did it for free because they work on commission. Sometimes just to cover the cost of going out there and not being sure what's going to happen would be a couple $100. It's so worth it. It just gives you a start. Most auction houses will let you send them pictures and they'll just kind of scan. I used to ask for pictures that I would call like room scans. Like just kind of don't send me everything on the shelf. Start with sending me the shelf, like the whole thing, so I can have a look at it. And then we'll go from there. And maybe we can narrow down on what I need to see the back or bottom of, or can you tell me more about this? So don't try to be the one that's going to figure it out if you're, a lawyer or a teacher, hire someone that's going to be able to sort of get you through it and tell you what um, was enjoyed during its time and then what does have, significant resale value.
Sarah, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen in this space?
I probably have a few examples, but I think I'm gonna have to say I had a case once where the deceased had an entire room that was dedicated to his heritage, which was mainly animal prints and things like that that he had kind of in his family for a long time. And one of the pieces he had was actually a real elephant's foot.
Uh-huh.
That was and yeah, it was like I mean, to me, this is like wild to possess this, and also concerning because I'm thinking like, how was this elephant's foot obtained, right? He actually had it going to different things from that room or going to different beneficiaries that were all over the world, like his nieces and nephews and children, and that also was a incredibly challenging estate administration, hurdle because of course these types of items, I mean, in some ways they're priceless. So that's one component is like valuations are not easy to, to ascertain. But in addition to that, of course, there's all sorts of rules and regulations around animal materials and things like that. And there is There is exceptions for things that are like heritage items and things like that. If you can prove that they've been around in your family for a period of time. But that was definitely the most kind of wild thing that I would say that I ever came across.
I remember spending a lot of time getting CITES, like worrying about the CITES permits so that we
Yeah.
could
Yes.
mail things across the border or receive things across the
You
border.
have an ivory piece from the 19th century and you go, it was fine. It was legal at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then oftentimes what happens is even with the proper paperwork, it gets seized anyway while they, review and consider, which is, fair. But yeah, it can cause a lot of, extra steps and, concerns also for the family members who are expecting to receive it. And then you also have to think about, how do you ensure, because Ellie, you mentioned, off the top, like you really should have insurance for, your collectible items, but how do you ensure things like this that are irreplaceable to a certain extent, right? So yeah, definitely a lot of challenges in dealing with those types of items.
Take it a little step back. So if you're planning your estate, there's two routes, correct, for your collection. There's the residual route, which is I leave everything else. So I leave my bank account and my investments, and I can share it the way that I want, and then I leave my residual, or I decide to leave specific items. So the painting on top of the fireplace, it goes to Ellie or it goes to Sarah. Does this happen a lot? Like, do people actually pick a piece where they give it to a particular person? Or is it typically, I'm leaving everything to everybody, and then people are forced to actually sell items that are of great value because they can't agree on how to share the items? So let's say I have a riopelle at home that's worth $1 million, and then I just leave it.
Must be big.
Must be big, yes. So, but let's say I leave a painting that's worth, call it $50,000, and I just leave it to everybody, and people can't
Hmm.
agree as to who's going to get it. That's typically what forces the sale. So before we go there, like, what's the best way to approach that? Because that's what creates tension down the line, which is like, something is worth money, but then we can't agree on who's gonna put it on top of their fireplace, like who's gonna put it in their living room, who's gonna put it in the dining room. So how does that happen? So as a planner, what's the best way to do this? And as a beneficiary, how do you handle it?
I've seen several solutions put in place. So ideally, everything's perfect and everyone's happy with what they're going to inherit, and that's fine, right? There's one thing that could possibly happen. Doesn't happen a lot.
Happy path.
Yeah. Um, Next, I have several options after that. So a lot of people, you know, are downsizing. And so that's a time when people will address their art collection. People don't always stay in their home with every single thing they've ever owned until they pass away. That's pretty rare.
Unless
So,
you have a real pet at home, you're probably staying home until
and
you
maybe you
die.
want to move to your nursing home with a Riopel. I don't
I,
recommend it. It's not a good
if
idea.
you own a real pet, you're not moving to a nursing home. Just to be clear.
There's a lot of texture on those. They're easy to damage. You have to be careful. So, that's when people will say, yeah, sure, my kids have always liked it, but I've got three kids, and so I'm gonna sell it. Like, that's it. It's mine. That's what I want to do, and I need the money, and whatever the reason. That's one thing. Some people will sell it to realize the profit that they've made from their wonderful purchase. That and they'd rather have the money, but the reason they don't because they still enjoy it. And so one of the solutions we had for a lot of people was that we would get a giclée made. So we would get like a beautiful reproduction of the painting made, put back in the same frame even. And then they would sell the painting. And sometimes their family wouldn't even know it had happened. So they would bring the painting to us down the road. It's like, this is a reproduction. This isn't real. What? That's another thing, take control. If you're ready to part with something, you don't have to leave it to your family. Like, it is yours. It's your decision what you'd like to do with it instead of letting them fight over it later on. You can also will specific things to certain people. I've seen that as well. Like to each of my grandchildren, I leave one painting by so and so, and to my children, I leave like maybe slightly more substantial things that are generally about the same value. But most of the time, people didn't do anything. And so what happened is you go in, you help them, you get the appraisal done so they can file for probate and they understand what everything is worth, and then you wait. And you wait, and you've got all these valuable things sitting somewhere in storage or in someone's house for them to be able to sell it once they finally get the authority to go to the next step. And then that process takes up to a year, right? You've got to also offer the painting at the right time. You want to maximize the return. You want to make sure it's clean and in good condition and that it's been marketed properly. And people don't know what they're dealing with at the outset of that process. So that's kind of why auction houses are still around and have been for a very long time. Because the wisest thing to do is don't try to sell it yourself, that's for sure. Is to offer it at auction where it's sold publicly so everybody in the family can see it happening. It's competed for, and the auction house just takes commission. You don't really even have to do out of pocket.
There's a market pricing mechanism there.
Yeah.
Like everything Ellie's just described, is how things play out, in particular for valuable pieces, right? Usually people are aware when doing their estate planning to think about those pieces that have significant monetary value, right? And even thinking through like the logistics of what's going to happen. Like if I'm no longer around, like is my house going to be empty with all this valuable artwork in it? Like because of course like it's very important that artwork is cared for properly, right? So is it like is the temperature at the correct level, like all of those little things, like who's going to store it in that time frame, that certainly if you think about it in advance and you think about either selling it or even gifting it before you pass away, providing that you don't want to continue to enjoy it, then that's all perfectly fine. I think where people get a bit tripped up is when they they don't think about the pieces that are maybe not as valuable, but still have maybe sentimental value and sentimental attachment. These are typically, often what trips people up in the estate settlement and causes a lot of conflict. Things like, jewelry, like mom and dad's wedding rings, stuff that, may be more valuable, just the gold melted down. It's not necessarily, collectible, and it's not necessarily particularly important to anyone else except for your immediate family members. But this is where things can really go awry in the estate settlement. That's the thing that I see overlooked more often. In fact, oftentimes people's wills don't mention personal effects at all. So, to your point off the top, Davide, it just kind of falls to the residue of the estate. And then the residue is divided, amongst your children, and then there's no mechanism for how to deal with disagreements. And worst case scenario is that stuff has to be sold when someone or all of your children may want to keep it.
Somebody
Right?
cared about something.
Exactly. So that's what I see more often, is that highly valuable pieces are typically planned for carefully, but everything else is kind of, a second thought or not a thought at all.
I've seen families also get the valuation and then kind of essentially purchase the artwork from the estate. Like if the siblings get along well enough, that's kind of a nice way to do it too. Like they might not all want the same thing, and they can kind of pick and choose what they'd like to kind of equalize that way. And an appraisal goes a long way to helping with family division.
That's a great point, though. Appraisals. So, what role do like formal appraisals play in both estate planning and estate administration?
Yeah, so for planning purposes, an appraisal can act as an inventory in a way, right? It's going to be a listing, and now they all have pictures because nobody, it's just the easiest way to go through a document when it's needed to see, like, oh, there it is. So that's one thing, and you can get it for fair market value so that you can help get an understanding of what things are actually worth today, like what you would kind of likely get in return were you to sell it, right? That helps with deciding who gets what, or maybe you want to sell things now, maybe you want to downsize your collection. So it's just kind of a really great tool for decision making, as long as you're getting that information from a qualified, experienced appraiser and not just, I don't know where else you would go. But then the other kind, of course, is insurance. So if you're getting your insurance updated regularly, we recommend every 5 years or so you check in. Markets change. I've seen even with Riopel, prices fluctuate, and depending on what's going on in the news recently, everybody went crazy for Maud Lewis paintings, which, before the movie came out were worth a couple $1,000s, and then they shot up to past 20. Things like that. So insurance is a good way to make sure you're always properly covered. And in a sense, it also serves as an inventory, at least of what the actual items are. But then after someone has passed away, as Sarah knows, you need another one. You need to know what it's worth on the date that they pass away so that you can calculate what the taxes will be. And that's also going to be a great planning document.
Sarah, appraisals in planning and administration, super important because different jurisdictions have different thresholds on the probate side, on the planning side. I guess there's a bit of research and planning and thinking about it on the upfront, but what's a general good rule of thumb threshold for it's worth it to get an appraisal on something?
On the planning side, it just depends how deeply you want to look at what you want to do with the items and how much you're looking at. Maybe you're trying to equalize between your children and things like that. So it's really more like you can use it as a tool to help you kind of plan what you want to do with the items. But on the settlement side, it actually goes beyond that. So as Ellie mentioned, you would need an appraisal as of date of death. And the reason you need it as of date of death is because from the perspective of, CRA or the probate court, this is the date that matters. This is the date that kind of is your estate is valued at, right? And a couple things that I think are important to keep in mind here. One is for probate purposes, if it's the executor's responsibility to basically list all of the assets of the estate and their values in this probate application. Now, that includes personal effects, whether they're collectibles or not, right? So getting an appraisal of the personal effects is actually an important step for the executor to sort of protect themselves in what they're declaring to the probate court. Right? Now, it could mean that you spent a couple $100 and you got back an appraisal that shows no commercial value all over it. And it just says, kitchen cupboard contents, no commercial value, and maybe there's only a couple things that have like some big pieces of furniture or technology pieces that have any kind of fair market value, but it's still important.
Quick question, Sarah. Does your random executor truly get a formal appraisal of the content of a house?
I think most people probably don't. But at the same time, if you are questioned, it's kind of your protection, right?
It's your yeah, there's a question mark there as to because I'm thinking of a scenario where I'm handling an estate. I'm an executor.
Mhm.
And I go, no commercial value, correct? I go in a
Yeah.
basement, no commercial value, bam. And then I take this painting that I just like, correct? But I think it's worth $100. I hang it over, I just take it. I just hang it over my mantelpiece or whatever at home. And 10 years later, Ellie, you come to dinner at my house and you go, holy crap, this is worth $1 million, correct? Like it's part of
Yep.
this. And then I go, shit, like I didn't declare it to the probate court. CRA doesn't know about it. There probably would have been a deemed disposition at the time. We'll have a completely whole other episode on taxes around this. So it's my liability now as the executor. So if I had gotten that piece of paper,
Yes.
at least I have something to show for the fact that I didn't just try to swindle everybody out of it.
Yeah, and I mean, even if there aren't things that are, I mean, obviously this is kind of an extreme example, but let's
It's the
say,
it's the example I'm thinking about, correct? Like
but even it,
I'm
I
dreaming
know.
about that example.
You're hoping that it happens. Even in the situation like this, even if that painting is not necessarily particularly valuable. Even just having somebody other than yourself state what was there and what wasn't there is
Yeah.
protection for you as the executor, right? What it's worth is additional protection. But another thing that I think people don't realize is that, I mean, the probate court, they have a rationale when they go through probate applications and they decide what to nitpick on, right? And when they look at a probate application that says the person owned a, four-bedroom house, but there's no personal effects. I mean, the probate court finds it hard to believe that you would have a four-bedroom house with nothing inside of it, right? So there is logic. There are logic tests involved here that can come into play. Now, is the probate court going to chase people down for what may not really amount to much in probate fees? Probably not. But at the same time, like, documentation is the executor's, protection. Now, I'll say one more thing that about why these appraisals matter. That's separate from probate because probate is simply, I mean, it's really a death tax in a way, right? You're charged
You said it. You said it.
you're charged in most jurisdictions based on, the value of the estate, a percentage of the assets. But this is not to be confused with income tax, which is an entirely separate thing that has nothing to do with probate necessarily. And I think people get a bit confused that like one replaces the other when you pass away. No, actually, unfortunately, both
Both
It's double.
are
apply.
in
Yeah.
play.
You're getting,
Exactly.
yes.
Both are in play. And income tax is, where you're looking at the difference between what you purchased something at and what it was worth the day you disposed of it. And, when you pass away, that's considered the day you disposed of it, right? So you also have an obligation to report things of value to
Because there's a
CRA.
deemed disposition at death. Yes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Also, executors are, responsible for managing the estate properly and maximizing the value. And there are real stories of, things being consigned to us that they did find at Value Village that were worth 20, 30, $40,000, $100,000. These are real stories that happened recently in Canada. The one that comes to mind, a painting by David Bowie that was found at the dump.
The David Bowie.
Yeah, like literally the David Bowie. Yes. And it was sold for a lot. And so it's like, who did this? Like, who
How
emptied
did
out
this
this
happen?
house
Yeah.
and
How did it
did.
end up there?
So it leads me to an interesting conversation, and we kind of alluded it to at the beginning, but it's provenance, correct? Like, so provenance, what's the best way to track provenance of an item? And I mean, I have probably in my household maybe two or three things where I really need to think about where do they come from, and how do I trace
Mhm.
back the paperwork? And I know that I've lost all of that paperwork. And so in
Right.
planning my own estate, I have three items that I know I should probably kind of think about it and kind of redo this. A lot of people out there, including you, both of you, are much better than I am at this stuff. But if anybody's seen my desk, you would understand why that paperwork was lost. But point is, how does one thinking about their estate, what should we think about in terms of provenance? What's required and how much is enough? And what's the 80/20 on this? 80/20 being 20% of the effort, generating 80% of the return.
So paintings tell a story in and of themselves. They should have labels on the back. If you don't have something like that, we want you to record where you got it from, who had it before you, if you inherited it, who was that person. I've had paintings consigned where I was able to see the appraisal that was done when the original owner passed away. So, for example, a Cornelius Krieghoff painting that we sold had been in the family for 100 years. And we had the appraisal from when that first owner passed and of the inventory in the house. Turns out the house was 24 Sussex Drive. So that was cool before it became the Prime Minister's residence, although now it's falling apart and no one lives there, sadly. This painting did hang there. And so even though it was just a story, they actually had an appraisal from the passing of that first owner. W.C. Edwards was his name, William Cameron Edwards. And this painting was in his collection. So not everyone's going to have that. So you've lost your paperwork. But then it kind of turns to the experts in terms of like their knowledge. So like I can tell a lot of the time if I'm confident enough to list something by an artist based on how it's painted, the medium, the support that it's painted on, the signature, the writing on the back. Like there are things that experts will be able to know. And if there's a little bit of a question, Canadian art, this happens a lot less, right? There's only so much history that we need to account for in Canada. European art, we're mailing things across the ocean to the estate to have them decide if it's real or not and to provide you with that letter of authenticity. So that's a lot of extra headache to go through, but it's possible and it's worthwhile to know one way or the other. If you have what you have, there's a lot of fakes out there too, right? So provenance helps a lot because you want to make sure you have what you have and the next person knows it's real, but also the story. So if it comes from a really cool family and there's a really great story attached to it, that's also going to add value far beyond what just another one would have.
Sarah, any thoughts?
Um, I think that a lot of times it's very tricky to replace that documentation when it can't be found, right? And like Ellie described, great ways to go about, trying to determine, providence, but the easiest, best way to deal with it is really just maintain the documents in the first place, right? Like keep the
So I messed
receipts.
up.
Yeah, yes.
We can talk. It depends on what the
Yeah,
things
yeah.
are.
Ellie will help you.
What about jewelry? Because I think in my mind, jewelry is there's value in the gold, the silver, the platinum, and the stones. Is there another way to think about the jewelry, or is that it? Unless a great artist kind of like designed it, and then it falls into the category of art, but otherwise it's just the value of the metals.
Yeah, which Tag Heuer, which Rolex do you
Yeah.
have, and how many did they make? And there's always ways to determine these things. Jewelry, yeah, there's a way to make sure what carat of gold it is.
To
And
me, a Rolex is a piece of engineering, and like there's a brand around it and there's a rarity around it. But like your grandmother had a necklace that's gold with like some kind of a
Mhm.
stone. That's just worth whatever it's worth, correct? Like it's just like it's put on a scale and you go, okay, like it's worth X. And now, great thing, gold is worth $5,000 an ounce or whatever it is. But bottom line is that there's no other way of thinking about it.
Yeah, depending on who made it. So if it's
Yeah. Okay.
Tiffany, if even if it's Burke's, the different well-known names like that. If it's Cartier, there's certainly things that you can add on.
Okay, so there's value in getting those appraised as well. That's my point.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
and if
okay.
they're not going to have that additional value, they're still valuable, and you need to know what carat it is, what weight it is, and you need it to be dealt with properly because the styles will matter and the tastes will change and the buyers will be different. But jewelry you can sell pretty regularly. Like there's always demand because of the value in the materials.
In the materials. Uh, I mean, we talk a lot about stuff on the podcast, and I mean, I have always this image of this basement filled with stuff,
Been there.
correct?
Yeah.
Like space, like just filled with stuff. And people, and I'm not talking about hoarders here, like I'm talking about just your regular average grandparents, parents' basement filled with stuff. And then people hold on to things because it has sentimental value. But the reality is that there's a lot of non-commercial value in there. Talk to me about that. Is it like 1-800 got junk? How do you just handle the massive amount of stuff that people have that's just not commercially
Yeah.
worth anything?
First step is to make sure you've identified everything that is valuable as best you
Yeah.
can. Maybe we can never aim for perfection, right? If there's a lot of things.
There's a David Bowie that ended up in the
I
bin.
mean, true story. Google it. Um, I don't know who's kicking themselves from that story too. Like, there's got to be someone out there like, dude, that was in Grandpa's basement. I threw it away.
I'm not throwing anything out from now on until I check with you,
Yeah,
Ellie.
right. Um, anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of stuff. 1-800 got junk, absolutely. But that'll be last, right? That'll be your last
Yeah.
option. There are online auction companies like where everything starts at $1 and people will bid on a lot of stuff. You would be surprised at what they are buying for $1. Then they come and take it out of the house. So that's kind of a neat way to go about things. There's, of course, the traditional auction houses. There's donation. And I wanted to go back to that topic actually. We were talking about donating like you want your collection to go to a gallery or you want your collection to go to a museum, that's often not going to be the case if that's something that you want to do. They're full. They have everything they could ever. They can't exhibit everything they have. If you donate something to a museum and they take it still might never see the light of day, right? They're just going to be hoarding it. There's a reason that there's so many Krieghoffs on display at the AGO. Like it was part of the rules of the donation of the Thompson collection, right? They have to be on display. You can tell. And boy, personally, I find that section pretty boring because it's the same painting over and over again. But there's no guarantee. And then the CPERP appraisals for things that are Canadian cultural property, those require a board and a couple of appraisals and like a whole review process if you want to get that tax exemption for donating something of higher value. So definitely call in experts if you want to be donating things, and don't expect that everything in the home is museum worthy, right? I saw an article recently. There's someone in Toronto who spent probably the last 50 years covering his Cadillac with like little figurines and bedazzling it and like Disney figures and gluing them on, and the car looks insane, right? And he's looking for someone to take it into their museum. And it's like, dude, nobody wants that. Like it's not valuable. Like that's sadly going to be for the scrapyard if you can't get all those figurines off. But yeah, it's one of those, like, there's so many quirks out there like that too, where it's like, oh, this will just go to a museum. Well, it probably won't. That's the thing.
So I'm hearing 1-800 got junk last,
Yeah.
but the reality is that you need judgment before that. And I guess what I'm looking for is what's the smell test for? I understand it's last, but it's probably going to be 95% of the
Oh, yeah.
stuff. So like what's the smell test for what's the 5%?
Yeah.
You told me earlier like oh like people kind of know what's worth something, but imagine I'm just inheriting an estate and I'm just walking into the
Yeah.
house and I know 95% is going to be junk and I need to move. What's the smell test for the 5%?
If you want to make sure, get someone to come through and pay them. If you don't
Yeah.
want to pay them and you want to start with something free, again, like when I worked at the auction house, I would look at pictures of rooms, right?
Yeah.
And do our best to give a little bit of direction there to see if they need to go further down that road. The responsible executors are going to CYA and they're going to have something that shows that they've done their due diligence and they've got some expert that's had a look through everything to see if there's anything to pick out. Generally speaking, yeah, like an auction house is going to take 5% tops of the stuff in a house, right? Like the market has changed. We're not selling everybody's carpets, desks, chairs, dining tables, pianos. Like there is no market for that, right? It's just not out
Yeah,
there.
of course.
Lots of sad stories about pianos. So yeah, if you're not sure, let somebody look. They work on commission.
Working on commission is great.
Yeah,
Ellie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
my pleasure. I'm happy to talk about this anytime.
We'll have you back. So, Sarah, what's the key takeaway for people planning their estate out there? What are the things coming out of Ellie's talk that are top of mind?
Well, definitely understand what it is that you actually have, how much it's worth, and also like how easy it is going to be for your family to deal with it, right? Because, and we talk about this part all the time too, which is like collectibles. They might be they might be collectible to you, but when you're gone, who are they really collectible for? Is there a market for, that thing? Is it meaningful to your family, and kind of the practical implications of your executor having to, your family members having to actually deal with those items is super important to kind of think and plan out in advance, because if these things are important to you, then obviously, you don't want them to just get chucked, right? Which is unfortunately sometimes what happens with people's items.
As per the usual, when we talk about estate planning, it seems that doing as much as possible while you're alive is actually the best way to go. Valuation, thinking about taxation, maybe traceability, thinking about collections,
Yep.
cleaning things up. I mean, it's all easier when you're around.
Yes, and some might say that it's kind of therapeutic to, go through your things and think through, how that's part of your legacy too.
I think it's also part of shifting mindsets
Yes.
and getting to a different place. So don't forget to share and subscribe to The Endgame by ClearEstate on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks, Sara.
Thanks.
ThinkBait. TNKR Media. Good talk.